You can use the variables and dataset features in Photoshop CS4 to create variations on a single web graphic automatically. For example, here I have a web banner that announces the surf spot of the month. I'd like to have some variations on this banner that I could use to freshen up the content on my website each month, or that I could use on different pages in the site. I'm working in the web workspace. There are 3 elements of this banner that I'd like to vary: the photo over here, the type that says the surf spot of the month here, and the small graphic that warns that this surf spot is for experts only. Each of these 3 items is isolated on a separate layer in the Layers panel, which is important for this technique. I'll go over to the Layers panel, and I'm going to hold down the Option key as I click on the photo layer so that you can see just what's on that layer. And I'll do the same on the Location layer. You can barely see, but there is the text Waimea on that layer. And on the Expert layer, just this little expert graphic. I'm going to define each one of these layered elements as a variable. You might think of a variable as a neutral container that I'll fill with different content for variations on this web banner. So the first step is to define these 3 elements as variables. To do that, I'll go up to the Image menu, and I'll choose Variables, Define. I'll move this Variables dialog box down so that you can see the web banner too. And here in the Variables dialog box, I'll start by defining the first variable, which is the photo on the photo layer. To do that, I'll go to the Layer menu, and here I see a list of all of the layers in the file. From here, I'll choose the photo layer. Next, I'll tell Photoshop what type of variable this is. To do that, I'll go to the Variable Type area, and I'll check Pixel Replacement, which means that its content is composed of image pixels, and that I'll be replacing the pixel-based content with a different photo for each variation on the banner. I'll give this variable a name here in the Name field. I like to use the same name as the corresponding layer to indicate that the 2 are related, but I'll capitalize that name here. So I'll select the default text, and over it I'll type the word photo with a capital P. In the Method field, I'll tell Photoshop how I want each photo to be scaled to fit in the same space as the photo that you see here in this banner. When a method is chosen from this menu, if I roll my mouse over that method, I can see a description of the method in the box below. These are the choices in the Method menu. I'm going to leave it set to Fit. Now I'm ready to define a second variable. I'll do that by going back to the Layer menu, and there I'm going to choose the Location layer. As you may remember, the Location layer is the layer that contains the text that names the surf spot of the month. I'll tell Photoshop what type of layer this is. Because this is a type variable that I'll be changing out in each banner, this is a text replacement type variable. So I'll select Text Replacement, and then I'll give this variable a name. I'll call it Location with a capital L. The last layer that I'll define as a variable is the Expert layer, which is the layer that contains this small expert graphic. To define this variable, I'll go to the Layer menu again, and this time I'll choose Expert. I'll identify the type of variable here. This is a visibility variable because the only change that I'm going to make to this variable across banners will be whether or not this graphic is visible. So I'll check Visibility, and I'll give the variable a name, and I'll call this one Expert with a capital E. Back in the Layer menu, notice that the Photo, Location, and Expert layers all have an asterisk. This means that those layers have been defined as variables. The other layers, the Background layer and the Flowers layer, will remain static from banner to banner. So now that I've got all the variables defined, the next step is to create some data sets to populate those variables. Each data set will generate a variation on this web banner that contains a different photo, a different line of type specifying the surf spot, and will display or not display the expert graphic. To make the data sets, I'll go to the Define menu here, and I'll switch it to Datasets. I'll start by clicking the Create New Dataset button here, and that makes a dataset that's called Dataset 1 by default. I'll change the name of this dataset to something more meaningful, Mavericks, which is the name of the surf spot that will be the subject of this variation of the banner. Now I'll set the value of the variables in this dataset. I'll go to the Variables area, where the Name menu is set to Expert. That means that I'm working on the Expert variable. To set the value of the Expert variable, I'll go to the Value field, and I'm going to set the value to Invisible, which means that in this variation on the web banner, the Expert graphic will not appear. Now I'll set the value of another variable by going to the Name field and choosing the Location variable. Here in the Value field, instead of Waimea, I'll type Mavericks. And then I'll set the value of the last variable from the name menu, which is the photo variable. To set its value, I'll click the Select File button here next to Value. I'll navigate to my 1304 subfolder. In that subfolder, I'm going to select the photo mavericks.psd, and then I'll click Open. And you can see the path to that file here next to the Value field. Notice that the chart at the bottom of this dialog box summarizes the name, the value, and the associated layer for each one of the three variables, the expert variable, the location variable, and the photo variable. I'm going to click Apply to apply all of the changes that I've made here to see the results here in the web banner. So you can see that the photo has changed, the name of the surf spot has changed, and the visibility of the little expert icon has changed as well. So I'm done making my first data set. Now I'm going to make a second data set the same way. I'll go a little faster this time since you've already seen me do it once. I'll go to the Dataset field and I'll click the New Dataset icon. Instead of calling this Dataset 2, I'll change the name to Rincon. I'll go to the Name field and I'll start with the photo variable. I'll select a file for the Rincon banner by clicking the Select File button. I'll choose photorincon.psd and click Open. Then I'll go back to the Name field and select another variable, the Location variable. In the Value field for this variable, I'll change the value from Mavericks to Rincon. And then I'll go back to the Name field one more time and I'll choose the Expert variable. This time I'll change the value of the Expert variable to Visible. I'll click Apply to see those changes here in the web banner. There's a new photo, the text is changed to Rincon, and the Expert icon is now visible. I'll make a third dataset the very same way. I'll go to the New Dataset icon here. I'll name the dataset. I'll call this one Pipeline. I'll go down to the first variable, which is the Expert variable, and this time I'll make the value invisible. Then I'll go back to the Name field and select the Location variable, and I'll change the value to Pipeline. And I'll go back one more time to the Name field. I'll choose the Photo variable, and then I'll click Select File, and navigate out to my photopipeline.psd and click Open. And finally, I'll click Apply to see the changes here in this variation on the web banner. So now I'm done defining the three variables and populating them with the data that I entered into the three datasets. I'll click the Preview button so that I can see live updates in the banner. To do that, I'll click the arrows to the right of the Dataset field. I can see the Mavericks banner with all of its changes, and the Rincon banner as well. Now I'm going to click OK to close the Variables dialog box, but leave the banner open here in the document window. I'd like to have Photoshop automatically generate three versions of this banner, one from each of the three datasets. To do that, I'll go up to File, go down to Export, and I'll go over to Datasets as Files. In the next dialog box, I'll click the Select Folder button, and I'll navigate to my desktop, where I'll make a new folder for my three banners. I'll click the New Folder button, and I'll call the new folder Banners, and click Create. Then I'll click Choose. Back in this dialog box, I'll leave the Dataset menu set to All Datasets, and then I'll go down to the File Naming areas. Here's an example of how each banner will be named with the default options here in the File Naming field. This name is a bit long. To shorten it, I'm going to make some changes to these file naming fields. I'll go to the first field, and I'll change it to Dataset Name. And then I'll go to each of the other fields and change those to None. I'll leave the file extension set to .psd because that's the only choice I have. PSD is the only format in which I can export datasets as files. I'll check compatibility with these other operating systems, and I'll click OK. And Photoshop goes ahead and creates and exports as PSD files the three variations on this web banner. To see those, I'll go out to my desktop, and I'll open the Banners folder. There are my three PSD files. I'll open all three of them. I'll set the first one to 100%, and then I'll go to the Arrange Documents menu, and I'll choose Match Zoom. So there's the Rincon banner with the orange photo and the expert graphic and the Rincon text. Here's the Pipeline banner with the green photo, the Pipeline text, and no expert graphic. And here's the Mavericks banner with the purple photo, the Mavericks text, and no expert graphic. Keep in mind that these three banners are not yet in web-ready format. To prepare them for the web, I would go ahead and slice each banner and then optimize the slices as JPEG, GIF, or PNG in the Save for Web and Devices dialog box. Now in this exercise, I created only a few variations on this web banner. But imagine that I were creating hundreds of variations on the banner. I wouldn't want to go through the manual process that I just showed you over and over. It would be more efficient to use a spreadsheet to populate the variables with different values. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do in the very next movie.